morning light filters through lace curtains, casting gentle patterns across a wooden kitchen table where James sits alone with his coffee, staring at the unopened envelope. He knows what's inside. Another past due notice. Another reminder of how quickly life can unravel from a single decision. Outside, the Pennsylvania autumn paints the maple trees in brilliant reds and golds, the same trees he and Lorraine admired when they first laid eyes on this farmhouse nearly 40 years ago. It was supposed to be their forever home, their sanctuary in retirement. Now it feels like it's slipping through their fingers, one missed payment at a time. The sound of the shower upstairs tells him Lorraine is getting ready for her shift at Martin's grocery. At 71, she shouldn't be spending 6 hours on her feet, scanning groceries and making small talk with neighbors who pretend not to notice the reversal of fortune. James takes a long sip of his coffee, wincing as his arthritic hand protests the weight of the mug. He'll be joining her at the store tomorrow for his own shift in the produce department. Retirement wasn't supposed to look like this. Their financial advisor had assured them they were set, modest but secure. The pension from his 32 years teaching shop at the local high school. Lorraine's smaller pension from the county library system. The farmhouse, paid off 5 years before they retired. The careful savings they'd accumulated, not enough for luxury, but enough for comfort and dignity in their golden years. Enough to occasionally spoil their grandchildren and take that river cruise through Europe they'd been planning since their 40th anniversary. But that was before the phone call 3 years ago. Before their daughter Rebecca's voice trembled with a mixture of excitement and apprehension as she shared her dream of opening a cafe in town. Before they signed their names on a loan that would eventually consume nearly everything they'd spent a lifetime building. James hears Lorraine's footsteps on the stairs and quickly tucks the envelope under a placemat. No need to start the day with fresh worries. They both know exactly where they stand. "Morning," she says, her smile tired but genuine. Her silver hair is pulled back in a simple bun, a few escaped wisps, framing a face that James still finds as beautiful as the day they met. The uniform she wears, a green polo shirt with the Martin's grocery logo, seems at odds with the English literature professor she once dreamed of becoming before life nudged her toward the practical path of library science. "I made you toast," James says, sliding a plate toward her. "Eat something before you go." "Thank you, dear." She sits, reaches for his hand across the table. Her fingers are thinner now, the gold band he placed there 47 years ago slightly loose. For a moment, they sit in silence, a practiced dance of unspoken communication. They don't need to articulate the weight they both carry, the mistakes they both regret, the pride they've both had to swallow. "Rebecca called last night," Lorraine says finally. "While you were at your physical therapy." James feels the familiar tightening in his chest, a mixture of love, disappointment, and a father's instinct to protect, even when protection is no longer possible or welcome. And she's thinking of moving to Pittsburgh. There's a restaurant group that might hire her as a manager. James nods slowly. He wants to feel hopeful for his daughter, wants to believe this could be a fresh start. But experience has made him cautious. "That's good," he says carefully. "It might be good for all of us to have some distance right now." Lorraine's eyes flicker with momentary hurt, then understanding. The cafe's failure hasn't just drained their bank accounts. It's strained the fabric of their family in ways they're still struggling to repair. "She asked about the house," Lorraine adds, her voice deliberately casual. "Wanted to know if we've decided anything." The house, their anchor, their greatest asset, and now potentially their last financial lifeline. The one thing they'd promised themselves they'd never lose. The equity they could tap to clear the debts that keep them working through pain and exhaustion at an age when their friends are traveling or babysitting grandchildren. "We're not deciding anything right now," James says, more firmly than he intends. "We still have options." Lorraine just nods, finishing her toast in silence. They both know their options are narrowing by the month. When they co-signed for Rebecca's business loan, the scenario seemed unlikely but manageable. If the cafe failed, they could cover the payments by drawing a bit more from their retirement accounts. It would mean scaling back their own plans, but not catastrophe. What they hadn't anticipated was the cascade of financial consequences. The cafe didn't fail suddenly. It died a slow, expensive death over 18 months. First came the cost overruns during renovation, an electrical system that needed complete replacement, plumbing issues that doubled the initial estimates. Then the delayed opening, burning through operating capital before the first customer ever walked through the door. By the time Rebecca called in tears, admitting she needed help making payroll, James and Lorraine had already extended themselves beyond what was prudent. But she was their daughter, the little girl who once fell asleep in James's arms during thunderstorms. The teenager Lorraine had taught to bake using recipes passed down through generations. Their only child, who had already weathered a painful divorce and was pouring her recovery into this dream. How could they not help? One loan payment became 2, then 6, then 12. Their retirement accounts dwindled, then were hit with early withdrawal penalties that further accelerated the decline. By the time the cafe closed its doors permanently, James and Lorraine had depleted nearly 70% of their liquid assets. And then the bank came calling for the remainder of the business loan they had guaranteed. Lorraine glances at the clock and stands, gathering her purse. I'd better go. Eleanor hates when anyone's late for the morning shift. James rises to embrace her, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. I'll pick up something for dinner on my way to the community college, he says. After retiring from teaching high school shop, he never imagined he'd be back in a classroom at 74, teaching a night course in basic woodworking to adults looking for a hobby. The modest stipend helps fill their gas tanks and occasionally covers a prescription copay. Don't forget your glucometer, Lorraine reminds him. Another new expense, the diabetes diagnosis that came last year, stress and age finally catching up with his body. After she leaves, James sits back down at the kitchen table and finally opens the envelope. It's not a bill this time, but a letter from their mortgage company confirming receipt of their hardship application. They're considering a loan modification that might lower their payments temporarily. It's not forgiveness, just a brief reprieve. But it might be enough to help them catch their breath, to formulate a more sustainable plan. James places the letter carefully in the folder where they keep all their financial correspondence now, organized by urgency, a system Lorraine developed to maintain some semblance of control over the chaos. He allows himself a moment of bitter reflection. How many times had he cautioned his shop students about measuring twice and cutting once? How many lessons had he given about the importance of planning, of understanding all the variables before beginning a project? Yet when it came to the most consequential financial decision of their retirement, he and Lorraine had acted from the heart rather than the head. They had measured their love for their daughter, but failed to calculate the true risk they were assuming. When they first met with the loan officer at First County Bank, James had felt uneasy. The loan officer, a young man named Alex with a crisp suit and a practiced smile, had slid the paperwork across the desk with rehearsed reassurance. It's really just a formality, he'd explained. With Rebecca's business plan and the location she's secured, the cafe has every chance of success. Your role as co-signers is just to give the bank additional security. Lorraine had asked thoughtful questions about their liability, their options if payments couldn't be made. Alex's answers were technically accurate, but strategically incomplete. Yes, they would only be responsible if Rebecca couldn't meet the obligations. No, their home wasn't directly collateral for this specific loan. What he didn't emphasize was how their entire financial picture could collapse if the business failed, how their credit scores would plummet, how their fixed income would be insufficient to cover the substantial monthly payments, how the stress would affect every aspect of their lives. They should have consulted their own financial advisor, Martha, who had helped them plan their retirement. Martha, who had always counseled conservative approaches given their modest resources. Martha, who had congratulated them on paying off their mortgage early and advised them to protect that accomplishment at all costs. But they hadn't called Martha, partly from embarrassment at considering such a risky move, partly from fear that she would strongly advise against it, and partly because deep down, they'd already decided to help Rebecca, regardless of the professional guidance they might receive. When they finally did speak with Martha, 6 months later, as the cafe's troubles were becoming apparent, her assessment was grim but compassionate. "I understand why you did it," she'd said, reviewing the damage already done to their financial security. But co-signing isn't just offering moral support. It's taking full legal responsibility for a debt that isn't yours. And most people don't realize the implications until they're already drowning. Now, as James closes the folder and rises stiffly from the kitchen chair, those words echo in his mind. They're already drowning, but somehow they keep finding ways to gasp for air. The afternoon light has shifted by the time James parks his 15-year-old Toyota in the community college lot. His evening woodworking class doesn't start for another hour, but he likes to arrive early to set up the materials and enjoy the familiar scents of sawdust and varnish. The workshop is his sanctuary, the one place where his expertise still commands respect, where his age is an asset rather than a liability. As he arranges tools for the evening's lesson on dovetail joints, his phone buzzes with a text from Rebecca. "Just had promising interview with restaurant group. Will call tomorrow with details. Love you both." James stares at the message, his emotions complex. He wants so desperately for her to succeed, to find her footing. Not just for her sake, but selfishly, for theirs as well. Every step forward she takes lightens the burden of worry they carry for her. But there's a distance now that wasn't there before. Conversations are careful, weighted with unspoken recriminations and guilt. Family dinners, once joyful weekly traditions, have become rare and tense affairs. The cafe's failure created fault lines in their relationships that continue to widen despite everyone's best intentions. Rebecca never explicitly blamed them for not providing more financial support to save the failing business. James and Lorraine never explicitly blamed her for the financial ruin they now face. But the blame exists in the negative spaces between their words, in the topics they carefully avoid, in the ways they no longer meet each other's eyes when money is mentioned. James texts back, "Great news. We're proud of you. Call when you can." He sets the phone down and turns his attention to preparing for his students. This is his life now, working well past when he should be, finding meaning in sharing his craft with others, while the financial pressures continue to mount at home. Class goes well. His 8 students are enthusiastic hobbyists, mostly middle-aged professionals looking for a creative outlet. They treat him with respect, bordering on deference, unaware that their instructor will be stocking produce at the grocery store tomorrow, that the skilled hands guiding them through woodworking techniques will be arranging apples and checking inventory for minimum wage. Afterward, as promised, James stops at the deli near home to pick up soup and sandwiches for dinner. The young woman behind the counter, Melissa, is the daughter of one of his former high school students. She insists on giving him the senior discount without his asking, a small kindness that both warms and humiliates him. When he returns home, Lorraine is already there, her shoes kicked off, her feet propped on a worn ottoman. The lines of fatigue around her eyes are more pronounced tonight. "Rough day?" he asks, setting down their dinner. "Eleanor had me on register 3 all day. The scanner kept malfunctioning." She doesn't complain about the customers who grew impatient, or how standing for 6 hours has aggravated her arthritis. She doesn't need to. James has worked enough shifts at Martin's now to understand the particular indignities of retail work at their age. They eat at the kitchen table, sharing the events of their day in the shorthand of long marriage. Lorraine mentions seeing their neighbor's daughter, now visibly pregnant with her second child. James describes a particularly impressive dovetail joint completed by one of his students. Neither mentions money, neither mentions the future. These omissions aren't denial, but survival, a tacit agreement to create small islands of normalcy in a sea of uncertainty. After dinner, they settle in the living room with cups of tea. The farmhouse creaks and sighs around them, its familiar sounds a comfort, even as they worry about maintaining it. The property taxes increase each year. The roof will need replacement soon. The ancient furnace consumes propane at an alarming rate during Pennsylvania's harsh winters. "I saw Martha at the store today," Lorraine says finally, breaking their unspoken rule about avoiding financial discussions in the evening. Martha, their financial advisor who witnessed the dismantling of the careful retirement plan she had helped them build. "Oh," James responds, his tone neutral. "She asked if we'd considered meeting with a bankruptcy attorney." James feels a flush of shame rise from his collar. Bankruptcy. The word itself carries such weight, such stigma for people of their generation. His father had paid every debt, honored every obligation, even during the leanest years of his factory work. "What did you tell her?" he asks. "That we're exploring all options," Lorraine replies, her eyes fixed on the amber surface of her tea. A silence stretches between them, filled with all they've lost and all they fear still losing. "Maybe we should at least talk to someone," Lorraine continues eventually, "just to understand what it would mean for the house, for us." James nods slowly. His resistance is crumbling under the weight of reality. Their current path is unsustainable, working part-time jobs that tax their aging bodies while barely making a dent in their obligations. Something has to change. "I'll make some calls tomorrow," he concedes. The relief in Lorraine's eyes tells him she's been carrying this suggestion for some time, waiting for the right moment. She reaches across the space between their chairs, takes his hand. "We'll get through this," she says. It's what they've been telling each other for 3 years now. Some days they almost believe it. Later that night, unable to sleep, James sits at the kitchen table with their financial documents spread before him. The numbers don't change no matter how many times he reviews them. The remaining business loan debt, $127,000. Their depleted retirement accounts, down to $42,000 from nearly $300,000 3 years ago. The equity in their home, substantial on paper, but accessing it would require either selling or taking on a new mortgage that their current income and credit couldn't support. Their monthly deficit between income and obligations, approximately $850, a gap they've been filling by drawing down their remaining savings at an unsustainable rate. James rubs his eyes, feeling every one of his 74 years. The wood of the kitchen table beneath his hands is smooth from decades of family meals, homework sessions, holiday gatherings. This house has been the backdrop for their life's most significant moments. The thought of losing it creates a physical pain in his chest. Yet the numbers before him tell a story that can't be denied much longer. Something substantial needs to change. The next morning brings unexpected news. Rebecca calls while they're having breakfast, her voice animated in a way they haven't heard in months. The Pittsburgh restaurant group has offered her a management position. The salary is modest, but comes with benefits. Health insurance, something she's been without since the café closed. There's a possibility of advancement if she proves herself. "I start in 3 weeks," she says. "I'll need to find an apartment, pack up my place here." Her voice trails off, the unspoken question hanging between them. Will they help her relocate? Not financially. She's careful not to ask for money. But perhaps with the logistics, the physical labor of moving. James and Lorraine exchange glances across the kitchen table. Their response needs no discussion. "Of course we'll help you move," Lorraine says warmly. "Dad can rent a truck. We'll make a weekend of it." Despite everything, she is still their daughter. They are still her parents. The complex tangle of love and hurt and responsibility doesn't simply dissolve because of financial disaster. After the call ends, James sits quietly, processing. Rebecca, moving 3 hours away to Pittsburgh, creates both relief and sadness. Relief that she's finding a path forward, that she'll have health insurance, that she may eventually be able to repay some of what she owes them. Sadness at the growing distance, not just geographical, between them. "This is good," Lorraine says, reading his thoughts as she often does. She needs a fresh start, away from the memories of the café, away from seeing us struggling because of it. James nods. "I know, it's just..." He doesn't finish the sentence. Doesn't need to. Lorraine understands the complicated grief he feels for the relationship they once had with their daughter. The easy Sunday dinners, the shared holidays, the casual drop-ins that punctuated their weeks with joy. All casualties of financial entanglement. 3 weeks later, they help Rebecca move to Pittsburgh. James rents a small moving truck despite the expense, refusing Rebecca's suggestion to make multiple trips in their own vehicles. His back problems make the loading difficult, but he pushes through, unwilling to show weakness or limitation. The apartment Rebecca has found is small, but in a decent neighborhood, walking distance to a bus line that will take her directly to the restaurant where she'll be working. As they unload the last of her belongings, the physical and emotional exhaustion of the day catches up with all of them. They sit among half-unpacked boxes, sharing pizza ordered from a nearby shop. The conversation is careful, circling around topics of Rebecca's new job, the neighborhood, her plans for arranging the apartment. Finally, as evening approaches and James and Lorraine need to begin the 3-hour drive home, Rebecca addresses what they've all been avoiding. "I want to help with the loan payments," she says suddenly. "Once I get my first few paychecks and see what I can manage after rent and essentials." James feels a complex surge of emotions: hope, skepticism, pride, caution. "Let's see how you settle in first," he replies. "Get yourself established. That's the priority right now." "Dad, I know how bad things are for you both," Rebecca insists, her eyes filling with tears. "I see the consequences every time I visit. You're both working jobs you shouldn't have to at your age. You're exhausted. You're worried all the time." "We're managing," Lorraine says gently, "and we're proud of you for this fresh start." Rebecca looks down at her hands. "I never thought it would go so wrong," she whispers. "The café, I really believed in it. I thought I'd done all the research, prepared for every contingency." "We know," James says, and he means it. Rebecca hadn't been reckless or frivolous. She'd created detailed business plans, researched the market, developed a concept that seemed viable. What none of them had adequately prepared for was how quickly a small business could consume capital, how thin the margins would be, how unforgiving the market for a new cafe in a small town with established competitors. "When I'm more stable, I want to help make this right," Rebecca continues. "I don't know how long it will take, but I promise I'm not running away from my responsibility." Lorraine reaches across the space between them, takes her daughter's hand. "We know that too," she says softly. The drive home is quiet, both of them processing the day, the conversation, the tentative steps toward healing the relationship. It's nearly midnight when they finally pull into their driveway. The farmhouse a dark silhouette against the star-filled Pennsylvania sky. As they prepare for bed, moving through their routines with the synchronized efficiency of decades together, Lorraine pauses at the bathroom sink. "I made an appointment," she says, "with that bankruptcy attorney Martha recommended, for next Tuesday at 2 p.m. James meets her eyes in the bathroom mirror, sees his own exhaustion reflected back. Okay, he says simply. It's not surrender, he tells himself. It's pragmatism. The meeting with the bankruptcy attorney, a compassionate woman named Diane with grey-streaked hair and direct eyes, is both sobering and strangely liberating. She reviews their situation with professional detachment that somehow still conveys empathy. Your case is unfortunately common, she tells them. Co-signing for family members represents one of the most frequent causes of financial distress I see in retirees. She outlines their options with clarity. Chapter 7. Bankruptcy would discharge most of their unsecured debts, including the business loan they co-signed. But it would require liquidating assets above certain exemption limits. Given the equity in their home, they might be forced to sell it or pay to keep it. Chapter 13 would allow them to create a repayment plan over 3 to 5 years, potentially letting them keep the house, but requiring regular payments from their limited income. There's also the possibility of negotiating directly with the lender, Diane adds. Sometimes banks will accept a reduced settlement rather than force bankruptcy, especially with debtors of your age who have limited income potential. James listens intently, asking pointed questions about each scenario, the implications for their future, the impact on their already damaged credit. Lorraine remains quieter, absorbing the information, occasionally squeezing James's hand when a particularly difficult topic arises. They leave with information packets, forms to complete, and a follow-up appointment scheduled for the following week. The drive home is silent, both processing the reality that they're seriously considering bankruptcy, something that once would have been unthinkable. That evening, as they sit on their porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Lorraine finally speaks about what's been weighing on her mind. I keep thinking about my parents, she says softly. How my father worked 2 jobs most of his life to make sure they never carried debt. How proud he was when they paid off their little house in Harrisburg. James nods, understanding completely. Mine too. Dad used to say a person is only as good as their word. That includes financial promises. But they lived in a different time, Lorraine continues, surprising him. Medical costs were manageable. College didn't require massive loans. Houses cost a fraction of what they do now. James glances at her, realizing she's working through something important. Maybe keeping our word doesn't have to mean destroying ourselves, she says carefully. Maybe there's honor in facing reality and making the best decision we can, even if it's not the one we were raised to make. James reaches for her hand, his throat tight with emotion. In their 47 years together, Lorraine has often been the one to see paths forward that he, in his stubborn pride, might miss. I've been thinking the same thing, he admits. About the example we're setting for Rebecca. Do we want her to see us working ourselves to exhaustion well into our 70s, to pay a debt that will take a decade to clear? Or do we want her to see us make a difficult but pragmatic choice that gives us some quality of life in our remaining years? The question hangs between them as daylight fades and the first stars appear overhead. They don't have an answer yet, but simply articulating the question feels like progress. The following weeks bring incremental changes. They continue gathering the documentation the bankruptcy attorney requested. They research what a Chapter 7 filing would mean for their home and discover that Pennsylvania's homestead exemption might allow them to protect a significant portion of their equity, possibly enough to keep the property. Rebecca calls regularly from Pittsburgh, sharing small victories at her new job. Praise from her manager, a customer who specifically requested her section, the possibility of additional responsibilities that might lead to a raise. She also sends $200 with a note that simply says, "It's a start. I love you both." The amount is symbolic compared to the overall debt, but the gesture itself means everything. James continues his community college teaching and his shifts at Martin's grocery. Lorraine reduces her hours slightly after her doctor expresses concern about her blood pressure. They begin to imagine a future that, while not what they had originally planned for their retirement, might still contain dignity, purpose, and even moments of joy. 6 months later, much has changed. After careful consideration and multiple consultations, they filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. The process was humbling, but ultimately provided the relief they desperately needed. Their home was protected under state exemptions, though they had to surrender a small rental property they had inherited years earlier from Lorraine's aunt. The business loan that had threatened to consume their remaining years was discharged, lifting an immense weight from their shoulders. Their credit is severely damaged, but as James Riley noted, at our age, we're not exactly in the market for new credit cards or car loans anyway. They still work part-time, James at the community college, which he genuinely enjoys, and Lorraine now at the local library rather than the grocery store, a position that brings her back to books and community service that defined her earlier career. Rebecca has been promoted to assistant manager at her restaurant and continues to send small amounts monthly, not because she's legally obligated, but because she wants to contribute to her parents' security. The relationship is healing, though differently shaped than before. On a crisp autumn day, much like the one when our story began, James and Lorraine sit at the same kitchen table, but the morning light reveals different expressions on their faces. There's a peacefulness that wasn't there before. A resignation to a changed future, yes, but also an acceptance that has its own kind of contentment. Lorraine mentions as she pours their coffee. She said that in her experience, the most damaging financial mistakes aren't usually from greed or recklessness. Oh? James raises an eyebrow. She said they're from love, from wanting to help family, from saying yes when we should say no, not because we don't care, but because we care too much. James considers this, turning the coffee mug in his hands. Sounds about right, he acknowledges, though I'm not sure I'd change what we did, even knowing the outcome. Lorraine looks surprised. Really? After everything we've been through? James thinks carefully before answering. We made a mistake in how we helped, not in wanting to help. We should have consulted Martha first, should have set clearer boundaries, should have made sure we had legal protections. He pauses, gathering his thoughts. But standing by while Rebecca struggled, when we had the ability to try to help. I don't think I could have lived with that either. Lorraine reaches across the table, takes his hand in hers. So what's the lesson then? For us? For others who might face similar choices? James smiles slightly, the wisdom of his 74 years evident in his eyes. Maybe it's that love shouldn't mean saying yes to every request, especially not when your future is on the line. Maybe true love means being wise enough to know when helping actually hurts, both them and you. Lorraine nods, understanding. And maybe it's also knowing that there's life on the other side of financial mistakes. It's not the retirement we planned, but we're still here, together, finding our way forward. Outside, the same maple trees that witnessed their arrival at the farmhouse 4 decades ago stand in silent testimony to resilience, to survival through changing seasons. James and Lorraine have weathered their financial winter. Spring may look different than they once imagined, but it comes nonetheless, bringing its own kind of renewal. If this story helped you, give it a like and subscribe to Goldprint, where real retirement stories aren't sugar-coated. Would you co-sign a loan for family? Why or why not? Share your story in the comments. Your experience could help someone else make a decision they won't regret.